So today, George Bendo from the University of Manchester and the UK ArcNode, and myself, Casirigo, from the Italian, from INAF, the Institute of Radio Astronomy, and the Italian ArcNode, will present you this document and give you some examples of how to use it. So please, the next slide. So the ALMA Archive Primer. So Archive Primer for short, because the name of Using ALMA Archival Data Primer is a bit long. The Archive Primer was created to give you an overview of the various steps involved when you want to use ALMA archival data. And you will see that the chapters of this document are structured in these steps. It was made with aim to help you with the scientific exploitation of the ALMA Science Archive. So each of the steps in using ALMA archival data are described concisely, and we give a lot of examples of CASA code and also of screenshots. For more detailed information, the document gives references to documents, to CASA guides and knowledge-based articles where you can find more information. Next slide, please. So where can you find the ALMA Archive Primer on the Science portal? So you can go to the Documents tab and then to the Cycle 9 documents, and you find it there below as indicated in the orange rectangle. You can also find it, as you can see on the next slide, if you go to the Data tab where you find the ALMA Science Archive, and you go to the ASA documentation, and you can find it right there. So some more information about this document in the next slide. Yes, about the document. So this document was made with the contributions of 18 people from across the ALMA collaboration. To make this document easy to use, and as I said, chapter-wise, because each chapter is representing a step in the chain of using archival data, we have that all the sections and the chapters are hyperlinks in the table of contents. So you go there, you can click whatever you're interested in, and you are directly brought to the relevant section. All the cited documents are also hyperlinked, so you can directly go to these for more detailed information. And this document will be updated on a yearly basis to be always relevant, always up to date. So with that, I will hand over to George, who will take you through the chapters of the Archive Primer.
So there are 14 chapters. I'm not going to go into details on the contents of the chapters, just review what's in them so that people have an idea of where they can find information in the document. To begin with, we have a very basic introduction section, which describes the purpose of our document, describes ALMA in very broad details for people who are not familiar with ALMA, and also provides a very brief introduction to the archive overall. Chapter 2 talks about querying the ALMA Science Archive, and it includes an extended discussion of using the ALMA Science Archive interface, which might be what most people think of when they think of the ALMA Science Archive. This discussion includes a lengthy discussion of how to use this interface to search for data within the archive in various ways. It also gives examples of how you can use the interface at the moment to produce previews of data. And it also gives examples of how you can also query the archive using various Python scripts, including Pivo and AstroQuery. Chapter 3 talks about downloading data from the ALMA Science Archive, including a discussion of the request handler, which is the screen that you would see after you select data in the ALMA Science Archive interface and decide to download those data. It gives a description of the various packages that are available, It also describes how you can preview images with CARTA, clicking on the icons on the far right in this screenshot, which will open up this display. It also provides a description of various download options, including how you can use Python scripts to download the data as well. Chapter 4 provides an overview of the download archival data itself, including some information on how you can unpack the data, which is basically stored into basic tar files. It also describes the archival data structure and also gives an overview of the product files that are available. Chapter 5 talks about how you can inspect the archival data. And aside from the discussion on working with the ALMA Science Archive itself, this may be the other most, this and the next chapter might be some of the more valuable resources to people, as it gives a description of how to work with the quality control materials that come out of the QA2 process. So there are descriptions of how to recognize good and bad data in both the visibility data, which are the phases and the amplitudes that you have before you produce images, as well as how to interpret some of the images that come out of the QA2 process. There are instructions on reviewing the QA0 and QA2 reports, as well as information on inspecting the QA2 plots for manually calibrated data, as is shown in this example, and information on how to inspect the web logs from the pipeline calibrated data, as shown in this example. And there are also explanations on how you can use PlotMS to inspect data as well. Chapter 6 goes into checking the quality of the archived images and the image cubes. This provides a very brief explanation of the ALMA Science Archive images, but then goes into a lot of details on the properties of ALMA Science Archive images. Some of these concepts may be fairly familiar to all astronomers, like there are discussions on spatial and spectral coverage and sensitivity. Other things may be a little bit new to observational astronomers who have not worked with interferometry before. So there is a discussion on beam size and UV coverage, where UV coverage is basically related to how you arrange your interferometer on the surface of the Earth, and how that affects both the large scale structure and the small scale structure that you can see in various astronomical images, as shown in this example here. There are also some examples of residual features and artifacts that you can potentially get from or you can potentially see within the archival data, as shown in this example. Chapter 7 talks about requesting and recreating calibrated visibilities from archival data. This is just basically instructions on how to prepare your data in case you want to create your own images. Chapter 8 goes into actually discussing how to re-image that archival data. This includes descriptions on how to do continuum subtraction, how to do spectral line imaging, and how to do continuum imaging. A lot of this work is done with the tclean command in CASA, and so there is an overview of the very important tclean parameters that you would use to create new images. Chapter 9 is a very brief discussion on data combination. When we were writing this document, we were quite conscious of the fact that we could easily write a 100 or 200-page document just on this specific topic. This involves, while it technically involves combining data from any two arrays, including any of the two arrays that comprise ALMA, a lot of the emphasis is actually placed on combining interferometric data with single dish data. And there's still a lot of ongoing technical work on that. We did not want to get into detail of that in our document. We instead provide a very brief overview of how that works, and we provide links to references which can go into a discussion of those techniques in much more detail. Chapter 10 provides a very brief description of some things that you need to think about when using the calibrators as science targets. The calibration sources, just to briefly review, consist of both solar system objects, which are more commonly observed, along with science targets in earlier ALMA cycles, and quasars, which have been used throughout ALMA's operations, but are now normally the only targets which are observed during science observations. Chapter 11 describes very briefly the ALMA calibrator source catalog, which is again a place that people can go if they want to study the calibration sources themselves, rather than study the other science targets which other people are interested in. Chapter 12 talks about a couple of additional CASA packages which are available for analysis of images or to assist with data processing. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list, but it includes a couple of very commonly used packages. Chapter 13 discusses frequently encountered issues. A couple of the highlights are one, finding the CASA version, because very often the software that's used to recreate the calibrated visibility data is dependent on the CASA version that was used to create that. And so it's a little bit of work sometimes to identify which CASA version was used to create calibrate a specific data set. There are also various discussions on how to troubleshoot running the script for PI, which would be used to create these calibrated visibility data. And then finally, chapter 14 discusses seeking assistance with using the archive, or with archive mining, or with science exploitation. And now back to Kazi.
Right, thanks, George. So we thought to give you a few examples of how to use the archive primer. In particular, we will pose a number of example questions and then show in what chapters you could consult to answer that question. So the first one is, how were a specific set of observations performed? So what you're looking for here is the metadata of the ALMA observation. To get that metadata, you start by getting the ALMA observation in the ALMA Science Archive. So that will be described by chapter 2. Then in chapter 3, you can learn about which data package to select and download from the ALMA Science Archive. And chapter 4 will explain to you the structure of your downloaded data and the files that are there. Then the most important chapter to consult here would be chapter number 5, inspecting archival data, because there is explained how you can consult the details regarding the observation, the weather condition, and the calibration that was done, specifically also the web logs, the QA0 and QA2 reports. So then to the second question, can I get quick look images of a specific object? So to start with this question, first of all, you need to find out whether that specific object has been observed by ALMA. So you start in chapter 2, searching for this specific object in the ALMA Science Archive to see whether you find hits at the band and the array that you are interested in. In the search result tab, always in the ALMA Science Archive interface, which is shown on the bottom after you've done the search, you can already have a first preview of quick look images. George has shown that in his presentation. If you want to have even a better preview, you click that ALMA observation and you go to download. And in chapter number 3, you can see which data package you can then open, which will be the products. And there you can preview every single image or image cube in the request handler. So these two things here, the previews are done in CASA, and they are done without ever downloading a single byte on your local computer. That's the super nice thing now of the capability of the ALMA Science Archive of offering preview images. If, however, you prefer to look at your images locally on your PC or laptop, go to continue the download and then go to chapter 4 to understand the structure of your downloaded data, where to find your images, and then consult chapter 6, which will help you in checking the quality of the archived images and the archive cubes. So that's for question number 2. Yes, question number 3, how can I re-image my archival data? So this question presumes that either the image available in the ALMA Science Archive was not done in the parameters that are useful for your science, or perhaps that the image is missing for that particular data set. So to be able to image the data, you first need to have the calibrated visibilities. And to do that, you would have to start by downloading them. So also in this case, we start in chapter 2, you search for that data set in the ALMA Science Archive. You select for download that bits of information, in this case, the raw data and the auxiliary data that contains the scripts to generate, to recreate the calibrated data, as is described in chapter 3. And you can consult chapter 4 for understanding the structure of your downloaded data and where all the relevant data have been put. Then in this case specifically, chapter 7 will then help you in explaining how to recreate those calibrated visibilities. And in chapter 8, you can then learn how to make new images out of that. There is also a shortcut version to this. So you can also start directly in chapter 7 and learn there how you can request calibrated data without going through chapter 2, 3, and 4, searching, downloading, and recreating them yourself. Question number 4, what problems could have affected my downloaded data? So here we assume that you already have your data on your disk. And you can start directly by consulting chapter 5 that will explain to you how to retrieve information about the observation run, the weather conditions during the observation run, and about the details of the calibration by looking at the QA0, QA2 reports, the QA2 plots, and the web logs. In particular, the diagnostic plots are explained, how you can then to understand the quality of the archival images, you can consult chapter 6. And for any other particular issues, for example, there are some issues related to the CASA version, you can look at chapter 13 for the frequently encountered issues. As always, if you find problems in your data or in your images, we always urge you to seek assistance, to contact the ALMA help desk or contact directly your ARC node, as is described in chapter 14. And finally, the last question, why am I having problems recreating calibrated data? Because this can happen. So you can start in chapter 4. Either you can directly decide to just request the calibrated data and be done with it, or you can decide to give a read again about how to recreate the calibrated visibilities. if that still doesn't work, please consult chapter 13, because we have an entire section that gives solutions to problems when running a script for PI that is used to recreate calibrated data. And also here, if you have any issues or the solutions, they don't work, please contact the ALMA help desk or your ARC node, and they will help you to overcome those issues. So these were a few examples of when you have a certain question of what chapters you could use to answer this. So George, if you can go to the last slide. Yeah, so that brings us to our last slide of the primer, which you can see here, the front page. So as I said, this document will be updated on a yearly basis. And this was the first version that we made of the document. So your feedback is very precious, is very much welcome, which will help us to improve this document and make it more accessible. So we really urge you to send feedback. Please send it to either the ALMA help desk or directly to George or me.